What is going on, guys, and welcome back to Touchdowns to Home Runs. My name is Bernie. Thank you for joining us today on the Touchdowns to Home Runs show. Hope that your day is going absolutely fantastic. The Toronto Raptors finished last season with a 27-45 record, but the Raptors do seem to be beginning a new era with a young and very talented team and a fairly new-look roster for this upcoming 2021 season. So today we'll be breaking down, previewing this Raptors roster, mainly looking at their starting five, but also breaking down their bench rotation and breaking down some of their newest additions. And then make sure to stick around towards the end of the video where I'll be giving my predictions and expectations on where I think the Raptors will finish in terms of the standings. Just before we do get into the video though, as always, if you do enjoy what you see today, please make sure to do me a huge favor, smash that thumbs up button, subscribe to Touchdowns to Home Runs for more content just like this. Before we get into breaking down the Raptors starting five though, I want to get it started with the offseason changes, starting with the losses and players that we won't be seeing returning to the Raptors this upcoming season. Aaron Baines, thank goodness. That was a big failed project last year. Bembry, Harris, Rodney Hood, Stanley Johnson, Paul Watson, among some of the other names not returning. And then, of course, the most notable one, Kyle Lowry, not returning after the sign and trade that sent him to the Miami Heat. And then in terms of notable additions this offseason and re-signings, of course, the re-signings of both Khem Birch and Gary Trent Jr., who we'll be breaking down later on in this video. Precious Achiuwa, Goran Dragic, and the Kyle Lowry sign and trade. That was the return package back to Toronto. Scottie Barnes, Banton, David Johnson, who we got throughout the NBA draft. And then the additional signings of Wainwright, Bonga, and Sam Dekker. But now let's get to the starting five, kicking it off, of course, at the point guard, who I expect will be Fred VanVleet. In terms of the point guard, there is a little bit of room for debate, but with Gary Trent Jr. expected to take a step forward this year, it makes sense for Gary Trent Jr. To stay in the starting lineup, play at the 2, put VanVleet at the 1, and leave Dragic off the bench, and I think that's what the Raptors are going to do. With that being said, and the departure of Kyle Lowry as well, VanVleet is going to have some big shoes to fill this year, in a really tall order in terms of what he's going to be asked to do two ways, and in terms of leadership of the Raptors offense and defense, and overall just expectations for Fred VanVleet, in my opinion, to have a breakout year this year. Fred VanVleet, over the course of the past couple of years, though, has already been taking some massive steps. Last season, averaged 19.6 points per game, 4.3 rebounds, which were both career highs, tacked on 6.3 assists as well. So he's definitely shown that, he can put up the numbers. He can definitely lead this Raptors offense. I think realistically, and we'll talk about this throughout the video with some of the other guys, but I think for a successful playoff caliber Raptors team, that you should have probably 3 guys in the 20 point per game range. And I think VanVleet can definitely be one of those players. Although, that would have to be averaging 20 points per game for the first time in his career. But again, I think he's more than capable of doing it. And as I mentioned, a big part of Fred VanVleet's role, of course, is going to come on the defensive side of the ball as well. I think making an all-defensive team is definitely a real possibility, given the Raptors' identity and the quality of Fred VanVleet's individual defense. He led the Raptors last year in defensive win shares. He's a great on-ball defender, and I think works perfectly into this Raptors scheme. So I think Fred VanVleet primed for a great year, 2 ways. We'll have to wait and see if that's actually how it plays out. At shooting guard, Gary Trent Jr., going to be a big factor, of course, for the Raptors this year, and should be ready to go after re-signing a 3-year deal worth just about $52 million. Of course, Gary Trent Jr. is only 22 years old, but at 6'5", gives the Raptors some really, really good height. And of course, as we saw last year in the minimal games that he did play with Toronto, is very productive on the offensive side of the ball. In 17 games with the Raptors last year, averaged 16.2 points per game on about 35.5% from 3 and 39.5% from the field. When you look at Gary Trent Jr., though, I really do think he's one of the X factors for the Raptors roster this season. And with no Lowry, he's going to be seeing increases in both the usage, touches, and probably field goal attempts per game as well. And for the first time in his career, for a full season, he's going to be tasked with really being a top scoring option on a team. So I'm really curious to see how Gary Trent Jr. fits into that role. I think he's more than capable of doing it on the offensive side of the ball. I hope he gives us a little bit more on defense, but I think Gary Trent Jr. honestly is primed for a breakout season. Small forward, of course, OG Anunoby already looks to be developing into a tremendous two-way player. What's really impressing me about OG Anunoby is how young, first of all, he already is, and given his age, the defensive responsibility and presence that he's already showcased, again, for his age, I think is super, super mature. But one of the other really interesting things about Anunoby is, we talk about how solid of a defender he is, but he's also developing into a very good offensive player who's gotten a lot better in catch and shoot situations. And some of his numbers, especially last year, were very, very, up and increased from previous seasons. He only played 43 games last season, but averaged 15.9 points per game, 5.5 boards, 2.5 assists. Also increased his field goal attempts per game by 3.9 shots per game last season. Still was able to maintain a field goal percentage of about 48%, which is about 2.5% under his career high, which is definitely pointing in the right direction for him. I think, again, much like other players on this roster, really fits into what looks like the scheme that the Raptors are sort of building around. Lengthy players who are really solid defensively and defensive-minded. And I think OG Anunoby definitely fits right into that, and he's a player who this year could potentially be able to develop into a potential all-star, maybe make an all-defensive team as well. I got big expectations for him this season. At power forward is Pascal Siakam. It's worth noting that Siakam will be beginning the season out of the Raptors lineup with an injury, but when he's healthy, I think Siakam is definitely the number one X factor for this Raptors team. And of course, that big question still surrounding him of, can Pascal Siakam be that number one option on a contending team? Last season, we did see Siakam's numbers decrease slightly, especially in terms of scoring. Averaged only 21.4 points per game, but struggled heavily from three, only shooting about 29.7%. But he did have career highs in 4.5 assists. He just missed his rebound career high with 7.2 rebounds per game, so affecting the games outside of just scoring. In my opinion, I'd love to see Siakam get to that 22, 23-point range, do so shooting near or above 35% from three, and I think you'd be really happy with the season that you're getting from him. But he's so crucial for the Raptors' success, not only this year, but the direction that you're trying to go in long term. I would love to see Siakam get to an all-star caliber for sure. I think he could definitely touch sort of third-team All-NBA in a perfect scenario. Again, very capable of doing that. But hopefully he gets healthy. Hopefully, again, he finds his footing in terms of scoring and beyond the arc. And I think the Raptors are definitely putting a good step forward if that does happen. At center is Khem Birch. Khem Birch, of course, as I mentioned before, back with the Raptors, re-signed with the Raptors this past offseason. I thought the Raptors might have prioritized trying to get another starting center to start ahead of Birch, move Birch to the bench. Obviously, that wasn't the case, and Khem Birch now should be the starting center. Last year, in 17 games for the Raptors, 11.9 points per game, 7.6 rebounds, 1.9 assists, 1.2 blocks. Had a very, very solid year, filling in for some really lack of depth in terms of big men at both the 4 and 5 that the Raptors had. I was really hoping that they did re-sign him. I'm happy that they did, and I'm ready to see Khem Birch continue to develop. In terms of the bench, I'm going to move through them a little bit quicker. Starting with Goran Dragic, of course, one of two pieces coming Toronto's way in the return package for Kyle Lowry, a veteran guard who, even given his age, is able to score the basketball, but can be a defensive liability, even though he does give effort on defense. He's definitely a guy that for now can be a veteran guy in the locker room, provide some leadership for a very young Raptors team. But with that being said, I do expect him to be moved near or close to the deadline. Malachi Flynn backing up, probably the 2. I think he'll be at the 1 quite a bit as well, but a super exciting player to watch, and potentially the Raptors starting point guard in just a few years' time. In his rookie year, 7.5 points per game, 2.9 assists, 2.5 rebounds. I think it's just about experience for Malachi Flynn. A lot of really, really solid things that we saw from him last year, and with an increased number of minutes, which I expect him to have this year, I think, he could definitely take another big jump this season. Scottie Barnes backing up the 3, definitely a player to watch off the Raptors bench. Of course, was the Raptors' 4th overall pick this past season and has seemingly gained a majority of the support from the Raptors fan base, and for some really good reasons. I watched him a bunch in college in his season at Florida State. Very, very fun player to watch. He's a great two-way player, of course. Struggles with his shot at times, the consistency, especially from beyond the arc. But what's really impressive about him is he affects the game in multiple different ways. He's a great rebounder, facilitator for his size and position. And the defense, he works hard. He's got great size. Scottie Barnes is a guy that I could see being in Rookie of the Year talks. No doubt about it this year. I think if you look at all of the sort of upper end picks of this year's draft, he's definitely in the best situation here with the Raptors. So I'm really, really excited to start watching him. Chris Boucher, backing up the 4 and 60 games for the Raptors last year. It seemed like Chris Boucher finally hit a bit of a breakthrough, took a step towards some potential that I think we always knew was there. And we were sort of just waiting for the right opportunity to start really, really playing Chris Boucher. Averaged 13.6 points per game, 6.7 rebounds, 1.6 blocks. So some really good stats, and played a big role again in what was a very weak sort of power forward and center room last year for the Raptors, and a lack of big men presence on the team. I expect him to have a very similar role this year. The Raptors don't necessarily have a ton of depth. They got some very quality pieces at both the 4 and the 5, but Chris Boucher is definitely going to be another big piece, having a big role off the bench this year. Last but not least, Precious Achiuwa, another guy that the Raptors got, of course, with Goran Dragic in that return package for Kyle Lowry. Didn't get a ton of playing time last year, only played about 12 minutes per game, but was still only the 20th pick a year ago. And I watched him a lot in college. He's a fantastic, very fun player to watch. Solid center for the future. Again, he's going to be a big piece in a sort of lack of depth at both the 4 and the 5, but he's mega athletic, fits the Raptors scheme in terms of having upside on the defensive side of the ball. Just a fun player to watch, as I mentioned before, so I'm really excited to see him get more minutes than he got last year for Miami, and play a big role off this Raptors bench. Finally, in terms of predictions, where I expect the Raptors to be and finish next year. Now, it's a bit tough, because the way that I describe this Raptors team is you got a medium floor with low expectations, but a very, very high ceiling. The Raptors, don't have expectations, but I think, could definitely surprise people. You got Siakam, OG Anunoby, Fred VanVleet, all could really realistically develop into number 1 options. And then you got a whole bunch of other young guys, Trent Jr, Malachi, Flynn, Scottie Barnes even, who could develop into just really solid players and have breakthrough years this year. That could definitely bolster the Raptors into an upper end part of the Eastern Conference. With everything being said, though, I'm going to put the Raptors at about the 6th seed in the Eastern Conference. The Eastern Conference is deep. It's not necessarily phenomenal. I think a lot of teams are still one piece away from being so-called contenders, for the championship this year. But I want to see these guys play together first. It's still very young, so I want to see the impact of some of these new guys. Scottie Barnes, I want to wait till Siakam gets healthy. So I'm going to put them at 6. Again, I think they could be higher. I think they could be as high as the 4 seed, maybe 3 if they're lucky. Could potentially be lower. You never know. But I think 6 is a really good spot for the Raptors. But anyways, guys, if you did make it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts, comments, predictions on this Raptors season down in the comment section below. If you did enjoy today's video, again, please do me a huge favor. Smash that thumbs up button. Subscribe to Touchdowns to Home Runs for more content just like this. We're going to be covering the Raptors throughout the rest of this NBA offseason and then throughout this season as well, so you definitely won't want to miss out. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you guys again next time.